In my last video, we were looking at some cool fishing pole traps and great gift sacrifices that you can unleash against black. Today, we're going to be looking at the fishing pole traps and great gift sacrifices from black's perspective, and that is some brilliant tricks for black that feature the fishing pole trap as well as the great gift sacrifice. And you might say this is a collection of all of my favorite videos featuring fishing pole traps and the great gift sacrifices, because I noticed that some of you guys might have missed some of these amazing gems. So it is time for you to catch up. And don't forget to share this video, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. When white starts with e4, just go e5. The whole idea is to start with the two knights defense like this. And if I turn on the master's database, you can see that pawn to d3 is still the top played move in this position. So most of your prepared opponents will play that, but after this, just go bishop c5, creating an impression as if you want to castle shot, which is not part of your strategies. So when you check in the Lichess database, you'll find that the top played move is castle shot. Sometimes they play pawn to c3, but that's not much of an issue. You can just put your bishop on b6 and play d6 in the near future and queen e7. But speaking of the top played move, castle shot, which is what you wanted all along, the move that you really want to play in this position is knight g4. But you only want to play this after playing pawn to d6. Why? Watch. Because if you play knight g4 immediately, your knight is not defended by your light squad bishop, so white may gladly sacrifice his bishop on f7 with check, hence taking your free pawn. And if you take back, this is when they go knight g5 check and misplacing your king before taking your knight. So this is why pawn to d6 was so important to, protect your knight in advance. So just going back a few moves, instead of going knight g4, back on move 5, you better play pawn to d6 first, preparing for knight g4 now. And this is when they play pawn to c3, and now you can easily go knight g4 because they are going to play pawn to h3, which is what you want. What do you do once again? You don't retreat your knight. By the way, you can if you want, but the whole idea is to go pawn to h5 right away, just like what we did with white pieces. Again, not objectively the best move according to Stockfish, but you are playing against humans who have eyes but cannot see, according to scriptures. So pawn to h5 is not much of a stretch. Again, if they take, you can simply take back, and this is good for black according to Stockfish. If they play knight h2, again you have queen h4, and there's little that white can do to stop this mate. In fact, there's a mate in 6 here. They'll just start sacrificing their pieces. Anyways, going back a few moves, after you play pawn to h5 and white takes, then you take back. If they don't go knight h2, but instead go knight g5, putting more pressure on your f7 pawn, this calls for wisdom and preparation. You have to remember this move, queen f6. It looks weird, because why are you giving up your f7 pawn? But if white takes with the knight, just know that there's a mate in 7 here. So there's a lot of ways, many ways in which white can go wrong very early in the opening stage. For example, after knight takes f7, there's a mate in 7 here, beginning with the hidden move, pawn to g3. I can find this move instantly on the board because I do practice chess puzzles almost every day, and that has sharpened my tactical vision, which is the only way to improve your tactical skills, guys. Start solving chess puzzles. If they take our rook, again, you need to be a little bit careful. Use your mind, use your tactical skills. If you go queen h4, chances are that your opponent won't see this move, but if they see it, just know that the game is back to normal. It's an equal game and you need to work for it once again. You are not losing. This is a very much equal game, and that's why you need to be extra patient when you are doing fine in chess. For example, you don't have to go queen h4. After seeing queen h5 check, you need to realize that the move is g takes f2 with check. This is the only move that leads to checkmate in 2. For example, if the white king goes to h1 or maybe h2, you have queen h4 checkmate. And let's say if they take on f2 with their rook, you can just take the rook, and wherever the king goes, you checkmate white on h4 once again. So you can see we are just using the same strategy, the same technique in the Italian game to finish off white very quickly, or our black opponents. Anyway, but one may ask, after we play pawn to h5 and white takes, we take the knight g5 and queen f6. What if white doesn't take with the knight, but rather take with the bishop, with check? This looks like the Traxler counter gambit, you guys, but the best you can do in the Traxler counter gambit or similar positions where white takes with the bishop rather than the knight is to just play king e7. You leave the back rank in an effort to connect your rooks. That's what you want to do, because after something like pawn to d4, again, you just go bishop b6. If d5, which most people do, by the way, you can just go knight d8 and just simplify the game like this. And there's a possibility for you to mate on h1 if white is not careful. At worst, you just want to get back your piece. If bishop g5 check, you can just put your king back and the knight is trapped. So in this line, you definitely get back your knight. That's the thing. Anyway, that Italian strategy which I just showed you reminds me of the fishing pole trap in the Ruy Lopez, where white starts with e4, then we go e5, knight f3, knight c6, and instead of bishop c4, they play bishop b5. Once again, you can just go knight to f6. Spoiler alert, you still want to go knight g4. For example, the top played move is castle shot, as you can see in both the Masters and the Lichess database. But let me just show you a quick trap. What you can do if white doesn't castle shot first, and let's say they play pawn to d3. This is the second most played move in the Masters database, and there's a trap that you need to know called the Mortimer trap, where we intend to put our queen's knight on g6 like for good and castle shot immediately after bishop c5. But the thing is, after you play knight e7, most of your white players will think you just left your e5 pawn hanging, so they are going to take. You can see that's the top played move in the Lichess database, which is a blunder, because now you have pawn to c6, and when they play the top played move bishop f4 once again, which is another blunder, you have queen a5 check, and they will definitely lose one free piece in this line. But not too fast. Sometimes after you play pawn to c6, it's not every time you're going to see your opponents playing bishop f4, which is a blunder. They like playing this sneaky move knight c4, so that if you foolishly take their bishop, they can mate you in one like this. Since your king cannot escape from Sobibo. So the best you can do after white plays knight c4 is not to take the light squad bishop immediately, but first of all to play knight g6, because now if this comes, you can just gladly take with your dark squad bishop. So this is when they are going to play something like bishop a4, and now you can win one of white's pieces like this. So this is just a little trap in the Ruy Lopez that you can try out back on move 3 if white doesn't castle short, which they are supposed to do, and instead go pawn to d3. Anyway, the top played move is castle short, after which you still go knight g4. In the Italian game, I said you only play knight g4 when your light squad bishop is already supporting that knight. But why playing knight g4 in this position before playing pawn to d6? Well, this is because white's bishop is not on c4 this time, so they can't sacrifice their light squad bishop to do that trap. Their bishop is on b5, so they'll still play pawn to h3, after which you still go pawn to h5, because what else? Again, if they take, this is a fishing pole trap, by the way, you simply take back, and on the next move you may win the game in a similar fashion. Like here, there's a mate in 11 which white can't stop with his elbow or his forehead. And let's say if white doesn't take your knight once again and rather go pawn to d4, for example, well, just leave your knight right there. That's the whole idea. You take the pawn, let them take with their knight, take the knight, and queen takes d4 is what you will see. So what do I recommend here? You simply give up this pawn, okay? Just play bishop d6. Now, once again, h takes g4. doesn't work due to the same mating idea that I just showed you. But with this bishop d6, your opponent is going to laugh at you, saying, what are you doing? I mean, bishop h2 won't be checkmate. So they will gladly take on g7, which is the top played move again. Now, this is when you play bishop h2, forcing white to enter into the line of our rook pin first, and only then do you retreat your dark squared bishop back to e5, attacking the queen. And note that they can't play bishop g5 here, attacking your queen, because they will end up losing their free bishop after we take the queen and they take. I mean, they're just going to lose their free bishop. Still, we have these nasty ideas, the discoveries. I mean, if queen g5, which is what they play, now you simply trade your queens and take on b2. There is no way they can stop us from capturing this rook on a1. They'll play knight d2 here. Now, wait a second. Even though you can take on a1, I recommend you make use of an in-between move, knight takes f2. Always look for in-between moves when you have so many options to take in a position, okay? The idea is that if they take on f2, now that's when you're going to take the free rook and maintain your bishop pair. But if they play king g1, now instead of taking on a1 once again, you play an in-between move. Once again, there's no memorization here. I'm just teaching you some basic principles. You take on h3 with check first. That comes with tempo, so that if they take, now that's when you can take the rook on a1. All right, let's go back. So back to this position where we shift our opponent's eyeballs to this side of the board and also double defending our e5 pawn. Then they play h3. Well, we just leave our knight there with h5. They'll probably not take but play d4, which is the top played move. And again, what do? You take the pawn, let them take with their knight, take the knight, and queen takes d4 is what you will see. After which you play bishop d6, completely giving up your g7 pawn. Now, your advanced opponents here may be clever enough not to take this pawn because of the continuation that I just showed you in the previous line. So you will see them playing pawn to e5 here. Now, just because you are playing an aggressive opening or an aggressive defense, it doesn't mean that you just need to continue sacrificing your pieces. Two of your minor pieces here are under attack, so don't take with a bishop, better take with a knight. It makes more sense. Rook e1 is what they'll play because they are used to these kinds of moves where they are pinning their opponent's pieces. Well, here I recommend you just go queen e7. With queen e7, you also have some possibilities of playing bishop c5 in the near future, pinning white's queen to his king. So white should be very careful. Let's say if they play pawn to f4 here, well, even though bishop c5 looks attractive here, but even better is to go knight f3 check, because that opens up many lines to win this rook. For example, king f2, queen takes e1 check, and then we win the other dark squared bishop. Next, we are planning to capture on b2 or on f4. All right, so let's go back to d4. After white plays pawn to d4 instead of them taking on g4. Here I said just take back, and after they take, you take, they take, and you just go bishop d6. So we just finished looking at what happens after queen takes g7 and pawn to e5. But what if white plays an immediate pawn to f4? Well, here you just go pawn to b6. I know queen e7 looks attractive, but b6 comes with some good ideas. First of all, bishop c5, pinning this queen to the king on g1. That's the first thing. The second plan is to fianchetto our light squared bishop on b7 and later on castle long after developing our queen, so that we can begin attacking from this side of the board since white has already castled short. One disadvantage of castling early, by the way. I have another video which talks about why you should avoid castling early. Anyways, they may still play queen takes g7 here, but you simply go bishop c5 check, an in-between move first. And after they play king h1, well, you go queen f6. There was nothing else you could have done here. Your rook was under attack, your knight was under attack. So queen f6 is simply a good trade because you are still ahead in development. Not to mention that you are just down a pawn here. It's just a pawn, but with some great attacking opportunities unlike white. Let me show you. Right now, we are attacking this pawn right here. So if pawn to e5, they'll allow us to put our knight on this juicy square, the e4 square, and maybe some opportunities to plant it on g3. So they have to play knight c3, defending their pawn. And after that, we simply fianchetto our light squared bishop, putting more pressure on this e4 pawn. And next we are planning to castle long and shift all our pieces on this side of the board. I mean, this will be a great game for us. Look, if pawn to e5 here, we simply go rook g8. Because if they take, we don't even take on g2 with our bishop. Even though we can, we just go rook takes g2. Because we have many possibilities of some great discoveries here. For example, if white foolishly plays rook e1, an in-between move, a check, well, we just block that with rook e2, blocking the check first, and at the same time a discovery on the king, and this will be checkmate in 3, which is a sad way to lose chess, by the way. Now let me show you the bishop version of this trap in order to satisfy your eyeballs. Alright, once again, white plays pawn to e4, we go e5, knight f3, knight c6, I mean bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez. Now this time, instead of playing knight to f6, the Berlin defense, well, I recommend you go pawn to a6. Also playable, by the way. Now wait a second, bishop a4 here is the main line and the top played move, but bishop takes c6 should not be underrated. This is called the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez. Once again, the idea is not to take on e5. That's not what white wants to do, nope. After you take back with your d pawn, their plan is simply to castle short. E.g., if they take on e5, we still have queen d4 here and we are assured of winning a pawn in this position. So you won't see them doing that. They normally castle short. After which we simply go bishop g4. Now I want you to picture this position. So whenever you see that white has castled short early, go bishop g4. This is okay. If they play pawn to h3, now it is time to play h5 once again. This is the bishop's version of the fishing pole in the Ruy Lopez. The idea is that if they take, well, we just simply take on g4 with our h pawn attacking the knight. And if knight takes the other pawn, well, checkmate now becomes unavoidable. There is nothing that white can do to stop us from mating on h1. I want to show you how to play in a similar fashion with the Lucini gambit. You simply start with the Italian game gioco piano after bishop c4 and bishop c5. And the move you want to see on the board is pawn to d3. I call this the d3 Italian. This is where the Lucini gambit shines the most. Once you see pawn to d3 on move number 4, this is when you want to go pawn to f5. And the main trap that is in the Lucini is where white plays knight g5 in an effort to get your weak f7 square, after which you go pawn to f4. You know the idea. If knight f7, the top played move, you go queen h4, wanting to checkmate white. If they castle short, the plan is to put your knight on g4. And a better way to do it is to go knight h6. Knight h6 also attacks white's knight on f7. So they have to do something about this. Otherwise, if they take the rook, now you simply go knight g4, wanting to checkmate on h2. If pawn to h3 is played, you simply take on f2. With your knight also attacking the queen, and after rook takes, you go queen takes f2 with check, king h1, and pawn to f3. On the next move, you might checkmate white on g2. If they are not careful, queen takes can be met with queen g1. Checkmate. This is the Lucini gambit with black pieces. I want to show you how to play in a similar fashion with the Stafford gambit. Of course, white begins with e4, then we play pawn to e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight takes, knight c6, again knight takes, pawn takes. Then since white's pawn on e4 is under attack, they all play pawn to d3, protecting that pawn, after which we now go bishop c5. In my previous videos on the Stafford gambit, I covered pawn to h3, bishop e3, bishop g5, and also knight to c3. But the top played move in this position, which most people don't talk about, is bishop e2. And I guess most of you guys already know what to do after bishop e2, because Eric told you to play h5. My main aim in this video is to show you how to play this exact line in white. So let me just lay a foundation. The idea of h5 is that if white castles short, you now go knight g4 immediately, and after white plays the top played move pawn to h3, here is where most of the black players tend to mess up. You don't play queen h4, the top played move. This is a very terrible blunder, you guys, because of pawn to d4. So this is not good for you. That's why after pawn to h3, the move that I recommend is queen d6, intending to checkmate on h2, and see how white cannot even play pawn to g3 here to stop the mate, because you can just go ahead and take that g3 pawn, see that the f2 pawn is pinned to the king by our dark squared bishop, so this will be mate in 2. I mean, even if white doesn't play pawn to g3 on move 9, after you play queen d6, let's say they go bishop takes g4, here you can just take that poor bishop with your pawn, now intending to take on h3. They usually play pawn to e5, you can see that's the top played move. You don't take the pawn because white is going to pin your queen, so you better go queen g6. Again, you can see pawn to d4 is the top played move, after which you just take on h3. You want to mate on g2. If g3, this time you don't have queen takes g3 because white's f2 pawn is not pinned. But you can play bishop g4 in this position, attacking the queen and also intending to put your light squared bishop on f3, followed by pawn to h2 checkmate. If pawn to f3, you now go bishop f5. Note how white cannot even take your dark squared bishop because you are going to take on g3 with your queen and mate on g2. So white may play something like pawn to g4 in this position, but you have bishop takes c2 attacking the queen. And if queen d2, they don't want to lose their d4 pawn, you just castle along and life is good. So these are just some lines to keep in mind when you are playing the Stafford gambit with black pieces in the bishop e2 line. Okay, so back to this position where we just play queen d6, wanting to mate on h2. We looked at what to do after pawn to g3 and bishop takes g4 where you just take. But what if white plays h takes g4 here? Like they take with their pawn, not with their bishop. Well, you can just take back. Once again, you want to mate. This is the easiest because whatever white does, you're going to mate on h2. For example, rook e1 doesn't do a thing. You have queen h2 check, and on the next move, you're going to mate like this. Let's go back a few moves and see what else white can do apart from h takes g4. Let's say if pawn to e5, pay attention, ladies and gentlemen. This is one position that you should always keep in mind whenever you are playing the Stafford gambit, whether with white pieces or with black pieces. The thing is, you don't want to take on e5 with your queen. Never take on e5 with your queen. You're going to lose instantly after bishop takes g4. That knight was just a free piece. White wants to play rook e1 to pin your queen to the king, so this is very bad. Even if you take back with your bishop, they can just take that free bishop of yours. Here you're just down a full piece, and white may end up pinning your queen to the king, so this is not good for your eyeballs. And that's why I thought of showing you this line, you guys. So once again, pawn to e5 should be met with knight takes e5, not queen takes e5. So write that down. If you are a Stafford gambit player, this is a must-know position, and I don't see many YouTubers talking about it, which is why this video is important and unique in its own nature. The top played move again is bishop f4. How do you punish this bishop? You give a check on f3, that's the knight sacrifice. After bishop takes, you now take that dark squared bishop and you are fine in this position. If rook e1 check, the top played move again, you go bishop e6, blocking the check, and on the next move, you are ready to castle long. There's another line that I don't believe in. After you take on e5 with your knight, instead of bishop f4, some white players like taking on h5. That is never a free pawn, ladies and gentlemen. You have pawn to g6 first. After something like bishop f3, here you can even sack on h3 like this. After gh, you take with the rook, and after rook e1, pinning your knight, you now castle long. By the way, you're going to take white's light squared bishop like that. This is check. Even if they take your knight, you can just take back. At the end of the day, you are just going to be up a pawn for nothing. So this is why Stockfish favors you with a negative 7.5 advantage. And that's all for today, you guys. Let me know which episode you liked the most in the comment section down below. And if at all you would love to see more of these kinds of content where I compile my favorite videos in one collection, of course, to make it easier for you guys, let me know. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye bye.